Hi and welcome. In Photoshop, a brush is a preset that controls the stroke and shape of lines when you're using the brush tool. Now, just like an artist can have many different brushes to create different effects on a canvas, Photoshop has many different brushes to create lines, shapes and artwork. Now, Photoshop comes preloaded with lots of brushes to use in creating your artwork and images. There are also many brush styles that you can download and install from the internet. Some are free, others you'll have to pay for. But the fun doesn't stop there. You can add to this arsenal by creating your own custom brushes. The only limit being your imagination. In this tutorial you'll learn how easy it is to make our own custom Photoshop brushes. A custom brush can be created from any vector shape, text or image, or any combination of the three. Even more exciting is when you delve into the dynamic options to change the behaviour of your brush after you create it. Okay, well, having said that, why don't we dig right in? There are two panels that we need to work with, and these are the brushes panel and the brush settings panel. Now, both these can be accessed through the window menu. So if I click on the window, I can bring up the brushes panel and I can bring up the brush settings panel, and there they both are. Now, the brushes panel is where we store and access and organise all our brushes, and the brush settings panel is where we can get even more creative and change the behaviour of the brushes that we make. Okay, first we've got to get organised, and we can do that in the brushes panel. Let's just move the brush settings out of the way for a minute and concentrate on the brushes. And here you can see these little folder icons. Well, these are what are called groups, and they are actually like little folders. And if we click this little triangle, this little carrot at the side there, it opens up and it shows you that we have some brushes in that folder. So it helps us to organise things a little bit better. So for this project, let's just make a new group. So I'm going to click on the new group icon, which is at the bottom of the brushes panel. And we'll call this one, let's say, My Brushes, for want of a better name. And then we'll click OK. And you'll see at the bottom now that My Brushes appears. And if I click that little triangle, nothing happens because it's an empty folder. There's nothing in it. You can move the folders just like you can move the brushes by clicking and dragging. So I can see this easily. I'm going to just click and drag this and drag it right to the top and just put it right at the top of the stack there. So now I've got my brushes panel right at the top where it's visible and I can see it. Right, let's start by creating a new brush. Now, to do this we need a Photoshop document open to actually design our brush. And I use like a 200 pixel by 200 pixel document. So I'm going to go up to the file menu, I'm going to click new, I'm going to click on photo, and I'll go for pixels and I'll say 200 by 200. Resolution, well, I'll just leave that to 72. RGB colour, leave that to white, leave everything else as it is, and I'll click create. And that's now going to create me a little, I'll just zoom in a little bit, Control and plus just to zoom in. And that's going to create me a document where I can now start to create my brush. Now if I look in my layers panel, you can see that I've got this as a background layer. Well, ideally what I need is transparency. So what I'm going to do is add another layer to this. So I'll just click to add my layer 1 and I'll rename that brush. And then just to save getting it in the way, I'll just delete my background layer, just get rid of that. So I've now got a transparent layer on its own. Now the maximum brush size in Photoshop is 5000 by 5000 pixels, but we don't have to create our brush that size. Painting with very large brushes requires a lot more memory and horsepower from your computer, which slows it down considerably. For typical work, you'll want to create brushes much smaller. Now the size at which you initially create this brush will come its default size, and it's important to note that the brushes we create ourselves are pixel based, which means they're essentially images and behave exactly the same way as a regular image when it comes to resizing them. So brushes will usually remain nice, crisp and sharp when we make them smaller, but if you increase the size beyond the default, they'll become a bit soft looking. General idea then is to create a new brush just large enough to suit your needs, which might involve a little bit of trial and error on your part. For me, 200 by 200 pixel size is usually where I place it, and it seems to work well. Now my idea for this brush is a simple scratch brush. So we need to start with an initial scratch. So I'm going to go to my paintbrush tool again, but I'm going to go right down. I'm going to go to 1 pixel and a hardness of 100%. And then I'm just going to draw a diagonal, a scratch. Oh, I don't like that one. Right, edit and undo, and we'll do another one. We'll just do a long scratch like that. Now we can go and save this as a new brush preset, and we can do that by going to the edit menu and down to define brush preset. So I'm going to click on that, and I'll call this single scratch. Oops, I've spelt that, made a right pig's ear of that. A single scratch brush, and then I'll click OK. And you'll see now it automatically loads it onto the cursor for me, but it also puts it in at the bottom of the brushes panel. So what I can do with this now is I can click and I can drag this brush, and I'll drag it right up to the top, and I'll drop it in my brushes panel. So now I've got my brushes folder group. I keep calling them folders because they look like folders, but it's called a group, and it's in there now. It's in the My Brushes group. Now what we want to do is to be able to preview it, to have a look at it. So for that I'm going to need like a new document. So I'll just open a new blank document. We'll go for new. I'll say print this time, and I'll have an A4. Doesn't really matter what. I'll just leave everything as it is. So I've now got a nice piece of white paper on which to demonstrate my brush. I can make it bigger or smaller with the square bracket keys, and I can change its colour. It's always going to pick the foreground colour. So here my foreground colour is set to black, so that's good. So if I just click once, it'll lay down my scratch. If I click and drag, I can do multiple scratches, which is pretty cool. Now I can see what you're saying, that now it's like not massively impressive, Ken, at the moment. It's a bit boring actually, but hey, we've made our very own custom brush, so let's have a bit of a yippee. And next we'll go on to making it a little bit more dynamic. Right, now to change the dynamics of the brush, we need the brush settings panel. So I'll just drag that over here so we can see it. Now the brush settings panel comes in a couple of different areas, and this left hand side is all the settings. So shape dynamics, scattering, texture, they're all settings. And when we double click in one of them, it takes us to the sliders, or how we can change the settings, and that's on the right hand side. And down at the bottom here we've got a preview. This is how it looks when we click and drag it as a brush. Okay, let's dig in. We're working with our scratch brush, so first off let's go to brush tip shape. So I'll double click on that, and we can see we've got all those brushes here, but we've actually got it'll be right at the bottom. We've got our scratch brush, and we're all ready to go with it. Now on here we can change the size of the brush. Well, I'll just leave that as it is. We can change the spacing, and this is the spacing between things as we actually click and drag with the brush. Now I'll just show you that in action. If we just move that out of the way, if we move the spacing up, you'll see that the spacing now gets further apart. So if I click and drag now here, you'll see the brushes actually stamped down with a bigger distance in between. Now if it was a circular brush, we could change the shape of it down here, or we can change the angle of it by just clicking on this little triangle. So we can actually change the angle of the brush as well. And again, you can see that in the preview. Now next we'll try shape dynamics. Now it's a little bit peculiar this, because normally you would think if you just put a tick in where you want to go, it will take you there. But unfortunately Photoshop doesn't always work like that. So what you've actually got to do to get the sliders for shape dynamics, the next set of settings that I want, you've got to actually double click on the word itself. And now we've got all these sliders. And you can see here we've got size jitter, angle jitter, roundness jitter. Have you never jittered? Right, well now you're going to. We're going to have a good old jitter together. And all jitter means really is random. So what it's actually saying is, right, okay, we've got a size jitter of 0. So basically 0%, we've not got any randomness at all. So if we click and drag, they'll all be the same size. Now if I put, let's say, well, let's go up for a 40% size jitter. Let me do it down at the bottom here. If I click and drag, you'll see the size changes as I do it. So I'm actually getting a randomness now in the actual size of the brush. Let me just clear this palette so that we can do some more drawing for you. There we go. Now minimum diameter is not going to do much really. Now we've got an angle jitter. And again, exactly the same. If I click and drag that, you'll see in the preview that now the angles are coming up, and they're coming up at all different angles because jitter means random. Roundness jitter is not really going to do much. And so at the moment we've just got that. So if I now click and drag with that, you'll see we've now got the size jitter. So it's changing in size and it's changing the angle. Next we've got scattering. So I'll double click to activate that. It automatically puts the tick in and takes me to scattering. Now brushes are defined by one or multiple shapes in the brush tip. Now the scattering option allows you to disperse the shapes like up and down or left and right or both as you paint in your document. And the count value here will determine the maximum number of brush tips that Photoshop will stamp each time you click. So let's have a look at that. So if we put a little bit of scattering, well, let's put quite a lot of scattering, and we can have it either on the x-axis or the y-axis. Let's have it on both axes. Now when I click and drag, you see we are getting now quite random stuff going off now. So it's scattering above and below, and you can see what's happening with the preview. If I move that back together, you'll see that's pretty linear. But as I move it, they actually move apart. So that's good. So let's clear that off again. Right, so now count. Okay, let's have count. And the count value, it'll tell you the maximum number of brush tips. So let's go for something like 4. And you can see in the preview, it's getting a little bit more chaotic because I'm having more and more little brush tips every time I click and drag. So now if I click and drag, whoa, oh, I like this. Yeah, see I've got some right old scratches going off here. Yeah, so I'll clear that off again, and now we'll go for colour dynamics. And here we can see that we've got the foreground background jitter, we've got the hue jitter, saturation jitter, brightness jitter and purity. So what are these all about? Well, foreground and background jitter, let's just set a couple of different colours for the foreground and background. Let's have, we'll say a red, and we'll have another bit of a contrasty colour so we can see the difference, and we'll go for something in like the, well, that's a bit greeny really. Let's go for yellow. So my foreground is red and my background colour is yellow. Now at the moment what it's saying is the foreground and background jitter is 0%. So it won't bring any of that yellow into the red mix. But if I pull this up to say, about 10%, what Photoshop's allowed to do now is, as I'm clicking and dragging, it's allowing a percentage of this yellow to be mixed in. So if I click and drag that now, You can see there is a couple of little yellow ones in there. Let me try again. I'll get it a bit more for you. So let's clear it all off again. Oop, I'm forgetting. I've got yellow, but it don't make it. So I'm going to need to go back and try this on here. So you can see there is some yellow ones in there. I know they're only thin, but you can see there is some yellow ones. There we go. So that's the foreground background jitter. It allows us to randomly mix together some of the strokes. Some are red, and then a random amount of yellow is going to be in there. Okay, I need to reset that and then reset the background. Okay. Now we've got hue jitter. And hue jitter is, well, more or less the same. It's the same type of thing as the foreground and background jitter, but this is specifically to do with the colour, because hue is the colour. So if I put a hue jitter, let's have a large hue jitter in there, what this will allow us to do is that each of the strokes will be able to be a different colour. Okay, now I've got this really high hue jitter, so when I click and drag, you can see that it's now, every time I click and drag, I've got a wide variation of colour happening. From these purple ones, green ones, yellow ones, brown ones, because it's mixing the colour all together randomly. Now, saturation jitter, it's exactly the same. If I have a high saturation jitter, it'll allow me to have different saturations of each of the strokes. So if I now click on that and drag, you'll see that they're looking a little bit more peely-wally. They're looking a little bit more, you know, they're slightly not saturated there. And then we've got the brightness jitter, and this is exactly the same again. It varies the brightness. So here now you can see, well, I'll do it down at the bottom. You can see some of them will be really, really like intense, and some of them won't be bright, hardly be bright at all. And that's because of the brightness jitter. Now let's just reset that, just so we can have a look at it, and then we'll go back for us colours again. We'll go back for red, and we'll go back for a yellowy colour. Now purity controls the overall saturation of the brush colour. Now this is different to the saturation jitter, which lets Photoshop randomly change the saturation as we paint. The purity option doesn't allow any randomness. It increases or decreases the brush's colour saturation. So if I take the purity slider down to -100% and click and drag, you'll see that they're all basically monotone, because I've took all the purity, all the colour out. If I take it right up to 100%, when I click and drag, you'll see there'll be lots of colour in it. So here you can vary the purity by just dragging that slider to where you want it to be. And that's about it for making a brush, a very simple brush, and adding some dynamics to it. I do hope you found it useful. If you did, please give me a thumbs up or leave a comment in the more area under the video. And also, please click that subscribe button and join my Photoshop and Lightroom learning community. I'll see you in the very next video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.